On the day of our third wedding anniversary, my husband, Alex, booked a table in a special private room for VIP guests at an expensive restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. For the occasion, he even wore a tailored black suit, fastened his cufflinks perfectly, and brought a bouquet of 99 red roses. I looked at those roses for exactly 3 seconds. The edges of the petals had already turned black, and the leaves had wilted with a striking resignation. The state of the bouquet perfectly synchronized with the state of our marriage. Alex handed me the flowers, his voice so sickeningly sweet you could make syrup from it. "Anne, thank you for these 3 years." I nearly choked on those words. Of course, I had nothing to thank him for. In the first year of our marriage, his first love, Lena, returned to the US from Europe, claiming she had recently broken up with her fiancé, was depressed, and was afraid to live alone. Alex immediately let her use his spacious apartment in the financial district, located very close to his office, free of charge. In the second year of our marriage, Lena's business project failed, and she found herself drowning in debt. Alex hugged me, said he felt terribly sorry for her, and on the same day, transferred $500,000 to her. In the third year of our marriage, Lena's cat started losing its fur. In the middle of the night, Alex bailed on my birthday dinner and rushed with her to a 2-4-hour veterinary clinic. When I asked him if he could glue the fur back on, he grew grim and yelled at me, accusing me of not being able to tolerate even a small cat. It was laughable to the point of tears. That cat eats gourmet French pâté of the highest quality, while I feed on my husband's endless empty promises. And I'm the one who can't tolerate the cat. If that cat understood anything about life, it would call me its main benefactor. Sometime in the middle of dinner, the waiter brought 2 glasses of freshly squeezed juice. Alex pushed the one on the left towards me. "Your stomach is sensitive, it's better not to drink wine. Have some juice." I looked at his tightly clenched fists. Over the 8 years I'd known him, I had learned this little habit of his all too well. Every time he lied, he did exactly that. I lowered my eyes. The juice had a beautiful, bright orange color, and small droplets of condensation sparkled on the sides of the glass. Alex didn't take his eyes off me. His gaze held tension, excitement, and a kind of impatient eagerness. A chill ran down my spine. When the thought that he wanted to harm me flickered through my mind, I didn't make a scene. Just at that moment, a message from Kendra, the private investigator I had recently hired, lit up my phone screen. "Alex Walker today at 3 p.m. purchased a powerful, illegal aphrodisiac from the dark web, then contacted 4 thugs with no fixed address. Meeting point: the basement of an abandoned tenement on the Lower East Side. Screenshots of chats, records of money transfers, and surveillance camera footage have been packaged into an archive and sent to your email." I placed the phone face down on the table. Noticing that I hadn't touched the glass, Alex tensed up slightly, and his smile became wooden. "Why aren't you drinking? You've always loved orange juice." I looked up at him. "You drink yours first." Alex immediately took the glass on the right and took a small sip. After drinking, he said with a smile that now I had nothing to worry about. I smiled back. His glass, of course, was fine. The problem was with the one next to me. Reaching for the juice, I deliberately knocked a napkin, and it fell to the floor. Alex reflexively bent down to pick it up, and in that exact second, while his head was under the table, I swapped the glasses. Alex handed me the napkin, looking at me with condescension. "Anne, we need to have a serious talk today." I took the now safe glass of juice and took a small sip. "What should we talk about?" Seeing me drink, he visibly relaxed. "Lena has been very down lately. She constantly complains that she's living in a shadow, without any social standing." I nodded. "No standing, you say? But when she spends my money, she lives quite lavishly. To every bank transfer, a note was added about a voluntary donation. She accepted that money more confidently than the IRS." Alex continued, "I want to give her security." I blinked. "And what does that imply?" He paused for a couple of seconds. "Let's get a divorce." This was no surprise to me. If he wanted a divorce, he could have just said so. But he had to spike my drink and hire some lowlifes to destroy me. It was all because we had signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement before the wedding. Whoever was caught cheating would leave the marriage with absolutely nothing. Alex was too cheap to lose his money, so he decided to ruin my reputation. If I were at the center of a dirty scandal, he could easily play the innocent victim. His calculation was so obvious I could practically feel it slapping me in the face. I deliberately feigned shock, my eyes slowly turning red. "Alex, are you leaving me for her?" A flash of self-satisfaction appeared in his eyes. He probably imagined me crying, screaming, and begging him on my knees to stay. But my tear ducts had long since run dry, thanks to the endless training sessions he and his Lena had put me through. He said softly, "Don't blame Lena. You can't force matters of the heart." I nodded and agreed that forcing things was indeed not right. Alex was taken aback. I pushed the juice closer to him. "You should drink some too. You've talked so much, your throat must be dry." He was in too good a mood, so without the slightest suspicion, he took the glass and took a couple of large gulps, emptying it by half. I watched his Adam's apple bob and mentally counted down. San. R.E. Suddenly, Alex frowned and tugged at the knot of his tie. "Is something wrong with the ventilation in this restaurant?" I asked solicitously if he was feeling hot. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breathing became heavy and ragged. Just then, his phone vibrated. Lena had sent her coordinates and a message urging him to bring me to the old building quickly. She wrote that, after tonight, I would no longer have the face to call myself Mrs. Walker. Reading the message on the glowing screen, I shifted my gaze to my husband. He was already leaning on the edge of the table, struggling to keep his balance. I said quietly that he shouldn't rush, and offered to drive him myself. After all, in the play he had so carefully prepared, the main character had suddenly been replaced. As I helped Alex into the car, he was still trying to maintain the last vestiges of dignity. "Anne, I don't feel well. Let's go home first." I fastened his seatbelt. "Home? But you've already prepared a place." He jerked his head towards me. The horror in his eyes finally broke through. "What do you know?" I opened the map on my phone. "Destination, a basement on the Lower East Side." A metallic female voice announced, "Proceed straight ahead." Alex turned as white as a sheet. I smiled my most tender smile. "An anniversary present needs to be delivered to the right address, darling." He tried to grab the steering wheel, but the drug's effect was too strong. His hands fell limply, and he slumped into the passenger seat, breathing heavily. I glanced at his face. A long time ago, that face had made my heart beat faster. In college, he once defended me from a senior who was harassing me, and when I had stomach cramps, he carried me on his back to the campus health center. I thought that was love. Only later did I realize that some men's tenderness is like a grand opening for a new store. A lot of noise and celebration at first, and then at the checkout, nothing but disappointment. When we arrived at the old building, Lena was already waiting at the entrance to the courtyard. She was wearing a white dress, a light scarf, and her eyes were slightly red from feigned tears. In her hands, she clutched an expensive designer handbag. Seeing my car, she immediately broke into a triumphant smile. But as soon as the door opened, her smile froze, because the first one to tumble out of the car was Alex. He clung pitifully to the door, his neck flushed and his shirt soaked with sweat. Lena screamed, not understanding how he got there. I got out from behind the wheel and looked at her with an innocent expression. "Lena, what are you doing here?" Lena opened her mouth but couldn't utter a sound. At that moment, heavy footsteps were heard from the basement. A few suspicious-looking guys hired by Alex emerged. The leader, holding a phone, gruffly asked if the girl had been brought and when the second half of the payment would be made. Alex's pupils constricted, and in a trembling voice, he roared for them to get lost. But these guys had already been drinking for courage and had received a deposit. They clearly had no intention of leaving. The situation instantly spiraled out of control. I took a couple of steps back and turned on my phone's camera. Of course, the lens was mostly pointed at the asphalt. You shouldn't film a crime directly, but the audio needed to be saved for evidence. Lena rushed forward to help Alex up, but he had completely lost his mind. He grabbed her wrist with a groan, and as soon as he did, the thugs surrounded them in a tight circle. Lena turned green with horror. She recoiled with a shriek, stumbled, and fell right onto the ground. Her white dress was instantly stained with dirt. I immediately dialed 911. I told the operator that someone here seemed to have been drugged, gave the address of the basement on the Lower East Side, mentioned the gathering of rowdy people, and asked them to come as soon as possible. After hanging up, I looked at Lena. Her eyes were completely vacant. Her lips trembled. From the basement came Alex's piercing, breaking screams, which made my stomach churn. Lena covered her ears with her hands. Makeup was smeared across her tear-streaked face. She muttered that it wasn't supposed to be like this, that it was supposed to be. Not finishing her sentence, she suddenly realized I was still standing next to her. I asked with concern who was supposed to be there. Lena turned white as a ghost, tried to explain something, but her eyes rolled back, and she fainted right on the asphalt. I looked at the one lying on the ground, listened to the one screaming in the basement, and sighed quietly. Love is truly a great thing. So great that even before losing consciousness, his first love didn't forget to try to shift the blame onto me. The police and an ambulance arrived almost simultaneously. In tears, I rushed to the officers, saying I didn't understand anything, that my husband suddenly felt sick and asked me to bring him here to see some acquaintances. And then this happened. The senior officer asked sternly why we had come here in the first place. I handed him my phone, showing that someone had sent my husband the coordinates. I thought it was his friend, but it turned out to be a message from Lena. According to the original plan, he was supposed to send me to that basement. Now, I had simply returned his own gift to him. When Alex was carried out on a stretcher, he was already semi-conscious. His clothes were torn, his face glistening with tears and sweat. Seeing me, he gave me such a wild, hateful look that it was terrifying. He rasped my name, accusing me of setting him up. I grabbed his hand, sobbing uncontrollably, and started to plead, asking how he was feeling and begging him not to scare me. The officers exchanged glances, and their expressions softened slightly. Alex choked on his anger and passed out again. Before the ambulance doors closed, I heard a paramedic say in a low voice to his colleague that the situation was bad, there was suspicion of serious internal injuries, and they needed to rush him to surgery. I brought a hand to my face, pretending to wipe away tears, but in reality, I was barely holding back my laughter. Alex regained consciousness only the next afternoon. He was lying face down in a hospital bed. The doctor said he had suffered a severe shock and sustained serious internal trauma, so for the time being, he would have to lie exclusively on his stomach. The doctor put it as delicately as possible, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing right there. Alex's mother, Maria, was sitting in the room, making a scene for the entire floor to hear, lamenting what her son had done to deserve such suffering. Alex's father, Robert, stood with a stone-faced expression, clearly believing his son had dragged their family name through the mud. Lena was in the adjacent room. After coming to, she alternated between crying and vomiting, and the nurses had to run to her constantly. I walked into Alex's room with a small container of homemade broth. His mother, seeing me, immediately rushed over with questions. How could this have happened? How could her perfect son get involved with this filth? With reddened eyes, I replied that I didn't know anything myself. I said that last night Alex felt ill, and I took him to the address from his phone. Who knew that Lena would be there too? My mother-in-law's face changed. She asked again if Lena was really there. I lowered my head and nodded. I said she had fainted, and I brought her to the hospital along with him. Hearing this, Maria stopped sobbing. No matter how much she loved her son, she understood perfectly well that Lena's very existence was a stain on their family. Alex lifted half of his face from the pillow. His eyes oozed venom. He rasped that I was the one who switched the juice glasses. I blinked in confusion. What juice? He gritted his teeth and hissed about the juice at the restaurant. I gasped theatrically and asked, was there something wrong with that juice? Did you really give me a poisoned drink? Maria turned to him sharply, demanding, what juice? What did you give your wife? Alex faltered. When this man gets nervous, his brain packs its bags and goes on vacation. I placed the container on the nightstand. I said my husband was delirious from the pain. I reminded him that last night he had asked me to drink the juice. I drank it, and nothing happened to me. Alex, with veins bulging on his forehead, shouted that I had switched them. My tears started to flow instantly. I asked how he could say such a thing, when I was the one who called the police, followed him to the hospital, and when the doctor asked about payment, paid from my own wallet. My mother-in-law looked at me indecisively. I continued to cry, adding that after Lena fainted, I had also paid all her bills, the examination, medication, the deposit for the room. I paid for all of it. At that, Maria completely melted and said softly that I had endured a lot. Alex, his voice trembling with rage, screamed at his mother not to believe me. Robert, in an icy tone, told his son to shut his mouth, stating that he had gone to such a hole himself and disgraced them all over New York. Alex, breathing heavily and rolling his bloodshot eyes, said he would file a report with the detective and accuse me of intentional harm. I immediately pulled out my phone and handed it to him, saying, please, call the authorities. If they can figure everything out, I myself want to know what really happened last night. Alex was stunned. Apparently, he thought I would be scared. But the more confident I acted, the more he panicked. Though panicking physically was difficult in his position. The detective arrived rather quickly. Alex, lying on his stomach, accused me through gritted teeth of switching the juice and bringing him to the basement, wanting to destroy him. The detective took notes in his pad, then asked a logical question. How did Alex know there was a drug in the juice? My husband's face turned to stone. A dead silence fell over the room. I covered my mouth with my hand and let another tear fall, asking, "Was there really something in the juice?" Maria, in a strained voice, demanded her son answer the detective's question. Alex mumbled for a long time and then squeezed out that he felt sick after drinking it. The detective gave him a hard look and informed him that they had already seized the surveillance footage from the restaurant and from the street near the basement. Preliminary data showed that the purchaser of the drug, the person who paid for the basement rental, the one who hired the thugs, and the contact person, all of it is tied to the phone number and bank accounts of Alex Walker. Alex turned whiter than a sheet. The detective added that the suspects had already been detained, and they all unanimously claimed that Walker had ordered them to wait there for a certain woman. My mother-in-law swayed and nearly fainted. I slowly shifted my gaze to my husband. The detective, in a stern tone, asked me to cooperate with the investigation, as I was, by all appearances, the originally intended victim. I closed my eyes, and tears rolled down my cheeks at the most opportune moment. Alex broke into a scream, denying everything and insisting that I had set him up and switched the glasses. The detective, in a completely calm tone, clarified. "So there really was a drug in the glass?" Alex opened his mouth but couldn't make a sound. At that moment, Lena's weak voice came from the doorway. She stood there, pale as death, holding onto the doorframe. Seeing her, Alex immediately reached out his hand, begging Lena to confirm that he was innocent. Lena averted her gaze and quietly mumbled that she knew nothing. Alex's hand froze in midair. I lowered my eyes. Well, the second act of the play had begun. After Lena regained consciousness, she changed a lot. Before, whenever she saw me, she would always lift her chin with a look that seemed to say, "So what if you have a marriage certificate? I'm the one who lives in his heart." Now, she looked at Alex with a very complex expression. It contained pity, disgust, but most of all, a sober calculation. She stood 10 feet from the bed and said, almost in a whisper, "For him to get well." Alex, lying on his stomach, looked at her with incredible longing, asking her to stay and take care of him. Lena clutched the strap of her purse tightly. She replied that she didn't feel well either, that the doctor had diagnosed her with severe nervous shock and she needed rest. Alex looked at her with unconcealed shock. He reminded her of her promise to be by his side no matter what happened. Lena's eyes reddened, and she retorted that in that situation yesterday, she had also nearly become a victim, and that every time she closed her eyes, she saw the whole horror again. Alex's face contorted. Lena had seen him in his most pathetic state, and now she was showing in every way that she was disgusted even to remember it. This hit him harder than a slap in the face. I stood to the side and, at the right moment, handed Lena a tissue, saying softly for her not to be afraid. After all, the doctor had warned that the consequences of psychological trauma needed to be treated gradually. Lena froze for a second, taking the tissue. She probably hadn't expected such care from me. Alex looked at me angrily and hissed for me to stop acting like a saint. I lowered my head and, in a perfectly quiet voice, replied that I was just worried about them both. At this, Maria couldn't take it anymore. She told her son to look at my kindness and compare it with their behavior. Alex's face turned the color of a ripe eggplant. Lena felt uncomfortable. She turned to leave. Alex panicked. He shouted that Lena couldn't just leave, reminding her how much money he had spent on her. Lena stopped. I looked up and asked, "What money?" The words had already left Alex's mouth, and he couldn't stop in time. He started listing the apartment, the car, the payoff for her failed business, money for her mother's treatment, and the credit card she used every month. Lena turned around sharply, and, in a raised voice, asked if he was going to count his money now. Alex lost his temper too. He shouted that when she was living like a queen, she didn't think about the money, that for her sake he had even mortgaged his stake in the company. And now she wouldn't even sit with him in the hospital for a couple of days. Lena trembled with fury. She asked, "Is it my fault that you've become like this?" She said that he was the one who hired those people, he was the one who messed up, and now he wanted her to waste the rest of her youth on him. A heavy silence fell in the room. Alex's face turned an earthy gray. Lena, realizing she had said too much, covered her mouth with her hand. I looked at them, and tears slowly gathered in my eyes. I asked in a trembling voice if this meant they had really been together for a long time. My mother-in-law's face crumpled. Robert walked up to his son and slapped him hard across the face. The sound of the slap was deafening. Alex flinched from the pain, and his pale face turned even whiter. Maria screamed hysterically, asking her son how he could try to destroy his lawful wife for this woman. Lena immediately started making excuses, addressing her mother-in-law, saying that she hadn't asked him to harm anyone, that she just loved him too much. Those words almost made me vomit, but I barely managed to restrain myself from applauding. She loved him too much, so she lived in my apartment, spent my money, and hoped my life would be destroyed. The entry barrier for the profession of a perfect-kept woman turned out to be surprisingly low. Alex tried to grasp at the last straw. He turned to me, admitting his mistakes and calling his behavior a momentary lapse of reason. With tears in his eyes, he said that only now did he realize how good I was. After all, last night, only I had saved him and brought him to the hospital. I took a step back, looking at him in horror, and asked, "Is it true that all that money you talked about went to Lena?" Alex choked on his words. I burst into tears. I reminded him that during our 3 years of marriage, he had taken my wedding savings, the income from my premarital investments, and all the money from my personal savings account, claiming they were needed to save their company. Alex began to explain hastily that money could be earned again. I asked how much exactly he had spent on her. He lowered his head and fell silent. Lena tried to slip out of the room unnoticed. I immediately turned to her, saying that she should know for sure. Lena's face turned to stone. My father-in-law, in an icy tone, ordered her to speak. Lena bit her lip and hesitated, mumbling something about $1.5 million. Maria's eyes rolled back, and this time, she was the one who fainted. I caught my mother-in-law, crying more bitterly than anyone present, but in my head, I was already quickly doing the math. $1.5 million. Large gifts to third parties during a marriage have a huge chance of being recovered through court. Oh, God. Alex really hadn't suffered his injuries in vain. That same day, I hired a lawyer. His name was Maxwell Vance. He was dressed in an impeccable gray suit, had a cold demeanor, and his words were sharper than a razor. After reviewing the collected evidence, he looked up at me and stated dryly that large gifts to third parties from jointly acquired property were subject to return. The apartment, the car, monetary transfers, luxury expenses. Anything proven to be a squandering of common funds could be reclaimed. I nodded, wiping my tears, and said I only wanted back what was legally mine. The lawyer looked at me, handed me a tissue, and said I didn't need to cry, as the evidence was more than sufficient. I quietly replied that I was just used to it. Maxwell Vance paused for a couple of seconds and then advised me to keep it up, as it would be useful in court. I definitely liked this lawyer, professional, calculating, and with a keen sense of the situation. As soon as the lawsuit was filed, Lena received a summons from the court. She rushed to the hospital to see Alex. At that moment, he was lying on his stomach, reading news on his phone. Rumors had already started to circulate in society. Someone had let it slip that a certain CEO, Alex Walker, had cheated on his wife, tried to frame her for his mistress, but ended up in surgery with shameful injuries himself. The comments under the articles were buzzing like a beehive. People wrote that the story was better than any novel, that the wife was a saint for calling him doctors, and asked, "Why would you even need a husband like that, except to take up a hospital bed?" Of course, the rumors didn't contain any explicit details. I had only casually mentioned to a couple of socialite acquaintances from the Hamptons that Alex had cheated on me, drugged me, got caught in his own trap, and was now blaming me for everything. These socialites usually sip the Mutsen tea and complain that the jam is too sweet. But when they get a scandal like this, the speed at which gossip spreads starts to compete with the speed of a bullet. Lena burst into the room with frighteningly red eyes. She screamed at Alex that I had filed a complaint against her and demanded that he immediately give me back the money. Alex winced. Lena shrieked hysterically that it was easy for him to say, but the apartment was already mortgaged, she had sold the car for a pittance, and the money was long gone. How was she supposed to pay back this debt? Alex's face darkened. He gritted out that it was money he had given her. Lena laughed nervously. With every word, she became more incensed, reminding him that he had once promised to divorce me, marry her, and make her his legal wife. And now that he had landed in the mud, everyone was cursing only her. Alex yelled in a rage that he was in a hospital bed only because of her. Lena froze for a second, then smirked coldly. For her sake? She threw the accusation in his face that he had his own selfish motives. He was just afraid of being left with nothing after the divorce, so he decided to tarnish my name. Alex grabbed a glass from the nightstand and threw it at her. But since he was lying on his stomach and lacked strength, the glass only flew halfway, fell to the floor, and shattered without any grandeur. At that moment, I appeared in the doorway with a basket of apples. I said that it seemed I had come at a bad time. Both fell silent instantly. I entered, placed the basket on the table, and addressed Lena. I said I had heard about her visit and wanted to warn her. The lawsuit is just a standard legal matter, so there's no need to be afraid. Lena looked at me as if she wanted to tear me to pieces and hissed for me to stop pretending to be an innocent lamb. I gently objected that I was indeed innocent. I didn't cheat on my husband, didn't drug anyone, didn't hire thugs to maim someone, and certainly didn't squander a stranger's husband's fortune. Lena's lips trembled. Alex suddenly changed his tone and plaintively said my name, assuring me that he had realized his sins and would definitely compensate me for everything. I looked at him and asked what exactly he was going to compensate me with. Will you write me an IOU, paying me back in the position you're currently in? Silence fell in the room. A relative of the man in the next bed couldn't hold back and burst out laughing. Alex's face flushed with shame and humiliation. I sighed quietly and suggested we finalize the divorce. He instantly panicked, refused to divorce, and declared that he had suffered a grievous injury. If I left him now, what would people say about me? My eyes filled with tears again. I replied that people already knew he had tried to destroy me for Lena's sake. And if I stayed with him after this, they would think I had lost my mind. The man in the next bed nodded in agreement, confirming that the lady was talking sense. Alex trembled with rage. Just then, Maxwell Vance sent a message. Original prenuptial agreement verified. Proof of Walker's infidelity is irrefutable. You have the right to strip him of his share of the jointly acquired property. I quickly typed, good, and when I looked up, I cried even harder. I reminded Alex that he had signed the prenuptial agreement of his own free will. My husband's face began to turn purple. That year, to prove the purity of his intentions, he himself had brought the document. He swore he would love me until his dying day, and if he cheated, he would leave with only the shirt on his back, just so I would be at peace. Back then, I was moved to tears. Now, I wanted to cry too, mostly from laughter. On the day of the divorce negotiations, Alex was wheeled into the room on a special medical gurney. He could still only lie on his stomach. Thick padding was laid on the gurney, and he was splayed out on it, from a distance resembling a beached whale. I quickly lowered my head and took a sip of water to keep from laughing out loud and spoiling my soulful performance. The Walker family's lawyer tried to build a defense. He stated that Alex's health had been severely harmed, and a divorce at this moment would go against the vows of in sickness and in health. Maxwell Vance, with a completely stone-faced expression, pushed a stack of papers towards him. He informed him that Anne had already fully paid the bills for the doctors, the hospital, and the nursing services for Alex. Furthermore, Alex was a suspect in organizing a criminal attempt on Anne's life and health, and a formal investigation was underway. The Walkers' lawyer fell silent. Maxwell Vance pushed a second stack forward. These were hotel records where Alex had met with Lena, their love letters, receipts, and witness testimonies confirming their secret cohabitation. The Walkers' lawyer began to drink water nervously. Maxwell Vance laid his final trump card on the table, the prenuptial agreement. The lawyer put down his glass, and his face clearly showed a desire to resign immediately. Alex gritted through his teeth. Are you really going to go all the way? My eyes instantly turned red, and I asked. Was I the one who went this far? Several of the Walker Company's partners were crowded outside the door. They had likely come to find out what was happening and happened to hear my sobs. I continued, if you wanted a divorce, why did you decide to destroy me? If you showered Lena with gold, why did you clean out my personal savings? You tried to set the authorities on me, but in the end, all the evidence pointed to you. Quiet whispers came from the hallway. One of the partners said the boss had behaved despicably, and Anne had even paid for his treatment, showing true class. Hearing this, Alex turned pale. He had always cherished his good name, and now it was being dragged through the mud, and that was more painful than physical torment. Finally, Robert spoke. He sighed heavily and ordered his son to sign the papers. Alex looked at his father in disbelief, but he only closed his eyes and asked, hasn't he brought enough shame to this family already? Alex was silent for a long time, and then with a trembling hand, he signed his name. According to the agreement, everything went to me. The apartment we lived in, bought with my money, became mine. The stake in the Walker Company, bought at my expense, returned to my hands. Alex was left with nothing. More accurately, he fell out of the marriage on his stomach. After the court session, he looked at me with red eyes and asked, is it really over between us? I pretended to think seriously, and then replied that in his current injured state, starting to court me again would be extremely inconvenient. Maxwell Vance coughed delicately. Robert covered his face with his hands. Alex nearly fell off his gurney from helpless rage. Returning home, I posted a photo of the divorce certificate online. The caption consisted of a single sentence: wishing everyone to get rid of toxic people in time and take care of themselves. The public immediately raised a clamor. Women congratulated me on my freedom, writing that I was too merciful to have paid for his doctors after everything. Someone mentioned that I had even hired him a caregiver, calling me an absolute saint. Yes, I did indeed hire Alex, a personal caregiver. He was a man named Bruce, 35 years old, broad-shouldered, strong, and very agile. His services cost a fortune. The referrer said Bruce had colossal experience and a special approach to bedridden patients. I spared no expense and paid for 3 months in advance. My former mother-in-law held my hands and cried, wondering why I continued to care for him even after the divorce. I gently patted her hand and said that he was, after all, seriously ill and would be very badly off without care. The relatives present all cried out in one voice, what a magnanimous woman I was, and how greatly Alex had erred in losing such a wife. Now the whole Walker family was at a huge loss. Alex listened to their praises with a complex expression. He probably genuinely believed at that moment that I still loved him. But he didn't know the little secret of the caregiver, Bruce. Bruce preferred male company, and he especially liked pampered boys like Alex, stubborn, capricious, pretty, and most importantly, confined to bed. Of course, I didn't give Bruce any wicked instructions. I simply paid him a generous bonus to care for his charge with maximum, tender dedication. Whether Alex's sanity could withstand such excessive care depended only on his fate. The case against Lena proceeded very smoothly. The judge ordered her to return all property received during our marriage. Housing, the car, cash transfers, expensive outfits, all of it was converted into a dollar amount, a penalty was added, and the final sum was so large that right there in the courtroom, Lena's face turned the color of wet ash. She burst into tears, screaming that she had never had that kind of money in her life. The judge coldly told her to pay the debt according to the law. Lena sobbed again, claiming that Alex had sworn to marry her. The judge, with a stone face, stated that empty promises don't exempt you from repaying what you took. I sat on the wooden bench and barely restrained myself from giving the judge a deep bow. Coming out onto the steps, Lena rushed at me, screaming, "Are you happy now? You've ruined me." I looked at her and asked, "Did I lend you money?" She froze. "Did I force you to live a life of luxury?" She gritted her teeth. "Did I beg you to sleep in my bed, drive my car, and squander my family's fortune?" Her face blotched red. I said gently, "Lena, in the adult world, you always have to pay your bills. You can run from your conscience, but you can't hide from the law." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she shot back that Alex wouldn't leave her in trouble. I smiled and advised her to go to him. And she really did go. But not even half an hour passed before she ran out of the hospital in tears. Later, from the Walkers' former cook, I learned the details. When Lena entered the room, Bruce was in the middle of giving the patient a sponge bath. Alex was in pain, hissing through his teeth. Bruce, in the gentlest bass voice, was calming him. "Mr. Walker, my dear boy, relax, don't be afraid, I'm holding you tight." Lena saw Bruce wrap one massive arm around Alex's shoulders while the other adjusted the padding under his hip. The scene would have been completely ordinary if not for Alex's wild reaction. He was screaming at the top of his lungs for the caregiver to get away from him. Bruce, in a completely innocent tone, replied that these were mandatory hygiene procedures and he needed to be patient. Lena froze in the doorway. The expression on her face changed every second. Seeing her, Alex wailed, "Lena, tell this monster to get lost." Lena shifted her gaze from the mighty Bruce to the splayed-out Alex and said quietly, "Alex, I still have debts to pay. I have to go." Alex screamed in a hoarse voice, begging her to stay, but Lena bolted faster than a hound on a hunt. Hearing this retelling, I sighed thoughtfully. No matter how bright an ideal first love may be, when it collides with the harsh reality of life, it shatters into pieces. To pay off her debts, Lena took on several jobs at once. Before, she proudly called herself a freelance artist whose main task was to show off outfits bought by Alex to her friends. Now, during the day, she worked as a saleswoman in a perfume shop, and at night, she streamed online for extra cash. The majority of her earnings were dutifully debited in my favor. When the first transfer came, I experienced very complex feelings. The amount was $450. The payment description read, "Court-ordered collection for the current month." I stared at those numbers for a long time. A single one of her dinner outings used to cost $250. The educational effect of such collections was far more potent than if she had written 100 letters of repentance. Alex wasn't having an easy time either. The detectives continued their investigation into the purchase of the drug and the conspiracy with the thugs. After the thugs confessed everything, he had no chance of getting out of it clean. The board of partners kicked him out of the Walker Company. His father told everyone his son was in treatment, but in reality, he had cut off his entire cash flow. Lying on a hospital bed, Alex finally learned what it was like to be penniless, without social standing, and completely alone. He called me dozens of times. I didn't pick up. Then he started sending messages from other numbers. "Anne, only now do I realize what a treasure you were. I have sinned. I beg you, come for just a minute. This bear Bruce is constantly pawing at me. Can you get rid of him?" After reading the last message, I replied briefly. "I've extended his services." The last time I saw Alex was 3 months later. I stopped by the Walker estate to pick up the last folder of papers. As soon as I entered, Alex's piercing voice came from his bedroom. "Bruce, you devil, don't hold me, I can stand on my own." Bruce's voice sounded soft but firm. "Mr. Walker, sir, you are still weak, don't be a hero." I pushed open the oak door. Alex, holding onto the edge of the bed, was standing with his face crimson from exertion. Bruce stood behind him, one massive arm wrapped around his waist, the other supporting his elbow. The pose was extremely ambiguous, and the atmosphere in the room was utterly absurd. Noticing me, Alex's eyes lit up with hope. He extended a trembling hand towards me. "Anne, you've finally come to me." I took a half step back. "Don't flatter yourself. I came to get my documents." The light in his eyes immediately died. Bruce bowed politely to me. "Ma'am, the patient is recovering well, but he has sharp fits of bad temper." Alex snapped for him to shut up. Bruce sighed heavily. "Well, you see, he's getting angry again." I barely suppressed a smile. Alex looked at me with remorse and bitterness. "Anne. Lena ran away. I have nothing left at all." I nodded. "Congratulations. Your dreams have finally crashed against reality." His breath caught. "We can start all over again." I looked out the window. The sun was shining brightly, and the green leaves of the trees were a joy to behold. Before, I was trapped in a cage called Mrs. Walker, desperately trying to prove I was worthy of love. Now, it seemed incredibly exhausting. I have money, my own business, loyal friends, and a whole free life ahead of me. Who in their right mind would go back for something they've already thrown out? I simply answered, no. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "I truly repent for everything," I said, completely calmly. "Well then, repent to your heart's content. Just don't drag me into it." Taking the folder, I turned and walked towards the exit. At the door, Bruce caught up with me. "Ma'am, will you be keeping me on for the next quarter?" I thought for a second. "I will." From the room came a desperate, animalistic howl. "Anne." In an excellent mood, I immediately wired Bruce his bonus. Later, I did a significant renovation of my apartment. The dark gray wall in the living room that Alex had liked so much was repainted in a warm, creamy off-white. All his suits disappeared from the closets, and their place was taken by my travel trunks, scuba diving gear, and easels with paints. I got certified as a scuba diver and, with a friend, opened a cozy coffee shop in the heart of the city. On opening day, the gleaming espresso machines worked non-stop. A delivery person came in for one of the orders. In a thick jacket with sweat on his brow, upon seeing me behind the counter, the courier turned pale. It was Lena. I handed her a paper bag with pastries, glancing at the receipt. The delivery fee was $5. Lena lowered her eyes and quietly mumbled that next month she would also be sure to transfer me the debt payment. I nodded. "See that you do, without delay." She clutched her phone tightly, turned, and hurried to her bicycle. The afternoon sun played on the clean windows. A thick aroma of freshly roasted coffee floated through the room. My friend, sitting at a table, asked how my ex-husband was doing. I lazily stirred my latte with a silver spoon. I heard he went to a private clinic upstate. Bruce, the caregiver, naturally went with him. My friend snorted with laughter. "And what about the lovely Lena?" "The lovely Lena is working hard, paying her bills." My friend raised her cup. "And you?" I looked at the bustling city avenue outside the window and gently clinked her porcelain cup with mine. "I've started to truly live. In this life, there is no more Alex Walker, no blind love for him, no false nobility, no trampled girlish pride. There is only me free, with a clear head and a full wallet. And that is worth celebrating with more fanfare than any anniversary."